Welcome. Thank you for coming to this special occasion tonight where I am celebrating the launch of my book, The Wolf in a Suit. How long has it been since you've heard a fairy tale? A while? Okay. I just happened to bring along my little Red Riding Hood cape. So I'm going to tell you a story. Little Red Riding Hood was loved by her grandmother, made her this beautiful cape, and she lived with her mother. Now I too was loved by my grandmother, and I lived with my mother and my sisters and my father, but we'll talk more about the story of the father in a little bit. Little Red Riding Hood was given the task to take the basket of food and drink to her grandmother, who lived out the village through the woods to the next village. It's a big job for a little girl. And so too, when I was growing up, there was unspoken expectations that were too much for me as a little girl to take on board. And I don't think I'm the only one that has that kind of experience growing up. There's no father in the story of Little Red Riding Hood. My father was at home, but in many ways he wasn't present. He wasn't present in the way I needed as a little girl growing up. So Little Red Riding Hood's given this basket of goodies. The basket of goodies I had going out in the world, what I learned indirectly through experiences, was to smile, to fit in, not to upset anyone, and to be quiet. And so that was what I took in my basket going out into the world. And so Little Red Riding Hood, given this basket and going out into the woods, it would seem to me that the mother was doing just what you do, just what the society around her fills her and influences her of what to do, and that there's a wound being passed on, an unconsciousness, because what mother would send a little girl out through the woods to do the job of looking after an adult when she's a child? And so those expectations that can be too much to bear. And so I had my basket: be quiet, smile, look after others, don't rock the boat. And when I learnt to live with what was unacceptable, and that was just accepted as normal. And so I go out into the woods, just as Little Red Riding Hood did. And the woods are big, they're thick, it's dark. They're as far as the eye can see. The light doesn't get in. And that's when I met my wolf. That experience from that first night I met him at a party was he stalked me from room to room. And those messages I'd absorbed from all those years was, you don't get angry. You don't be unattractive. And I didn't know how to tell him to leave me alone. So I kept on just trying to avoid him and go from room to room, but he kept following me. And then at the end of the night, I said to him, I just want to be friends. I didn't even want to be friends. I didn't like him from the moment I saw him. But I didn't have the support from back home that enabled me to be able to speak my truth. There wasn't a father that encouraged me in how to go out in the world and be fiery and be protective and prioritise me. A couple of weeks ago I was taking my granddaughter to the swimming pool on one of those beautiful warm days, and she wanted to watch the boys diving off the diving board. They were just like primary school boys. We're standing there enjoying watching these boys. You know how they do it, arms and legs out, big roars, big splashes. It was gorgeous. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, what's Little Red Riding Hood taught? We're taught as girls to be attractive, pretty. We're not encouraged to be just in the fullness of our body, make the sounds, do whatever we want, affect our environment. We're taught as girls to really focus on the environment around us. And so too with Little Red Riding Hood. She's given these tasks to go out into the world, given these messages of how to be kind, and she's not told that there's wolves out there. And she's not told that the wolves don't follow the rules that she's been taught. And so, like Little Red Riding Hood, when I met my wolf, I was caught going on being kind and nice and polite. And I couldn't get away from him because he didn't listen to any of my signals or my words. And I can remember walking down the street with him one day and just feeling like I can't get away because there was no access to being able to be fierce. And I went back to the learnings I'd received from my mother, that you don't get angry, you don't hate, you be spiritual, and you've got to love everybody. And I made this, I can remember it clear as anything, I made this decision that, well, this must be my task, my lesson, yeah? That I'm meant to love this person. And that was what I entered the relationship with. Not my own fierce instinct that could protect and guide me, but that submissiveness. When Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door, she didn't want to go in. She knew in herself. And every woman I speak to who has left an abusive relationship, when I ask them the question, in hindsight now, did you realise? Did you see the warning signs? Every single one says yes. And so too, when she went in and she stood at the bed where the wolf was, and he says, and she says to him, what big eyes you have, what big ears you have. Can you see? She knows something's not right. She's trying to check again, but where she's going to get her feedback is not the right place. And so too as women, we are encouraged to get our reference point from outside of us and not listen to our instinct that knows. And so with this, we enter into relationships just as I did. And when things weren't going well and things were stressful and traumatic and scary, what did I have to draw on but to be kind, understanding, fair? Now, if I'm all those things, won't it work out? If I'm being reasonable, won't the other person get that and will be able to work it out? But with a wolf, it doesn't. So just like Little Red Riding Hood, I was taught how to be nice, but that's only half the picture. We need to have our fierceness. And when we don't have it, we take our innocence out into the world, and that innocence gets turned into naivety because we don't have the protectiveness of our instinct and our fierceness. And so we think that if we're fair and kind and caring and even assertive, the other person's going to come to the table and respond. But wolves don't. they use the kindness to their advantage. They use the patience and the tolerance and the understanding and manipulate it. So that's my story of Little Red Riding Hood, that we get taught that what we've got in our basket is not what we need. We need more than that. But there's a woodcutter, the wonderful woodcutter. And I want everyone to be able to find their woodcutter within. Yeah. Because there's 3 things the woodcutter does that help save Little Red Riding Hood. The first thing he does is he listens to the little. He doesn't say, oh, it's little, it's not important. He knows little is important. It doesn't have to grow bigger to be important. He listens for the wolves prowling. He listens for the creak of a tree falling. So he knows little is big too. So if we can all attend to the little and take the little seriously, there's going to be less of the big to deal with. The second thing he does is when he hears the wolf snoring, he rushes in. He doesn't say it's none of my business. He's willing to take a risk. And so too, if we can all, when something doesn't smell right, step in, be willing to take a risk. And the third thing the woodcutter does, he's willing to make a mess. Yeah, he's willing to cut open the wolf to get to what is important and good. And so too, in our conversations, in our personal friendship circles, professionally, if we can listen to the little, if we can step in when something doesn't smell right, if we can be willing to be with the uncomfortable, willing for things to get messy before they get better, then we can make a big difference. Because my concern is, as a psychotherapist that's been working in the field 20 years, is we're still talking about the same things as 20 years ago. And that really bothers me. And what I've found is that there's 3 things that people don't do, because we're only as, the community is only as good as the individual can be. And the 3 things that we still have difficulty with, even if we have so much awareness, we need action. And to have action, there's 3 things that we need. And the first thing is we need to be able to recognise when something's going on around us. And the second thing is we need to have some sense about what to say or do. And my experience is people still don't know how to recognise what's going on and what to say or do. We need to, the third thing is have the emotional muscle to do those 2 things. Yeah. And I'm going to talk more about why those 3 things are so difficult for us as an intelligent community and society, why we still have such difficulty being able to do those 3 things that make a healthy community. So I'm going to just draw this is the inner circle is the woman. Yeah? The next circle is the man, when we're talking generally speaking. Yeah? Though of course the person using abuse can be a woman and the person being abused can be a man. And the third outer circle is our community. And my experience is, as a survivor, No one spoke to me when I was in the relationship. I was terrified. I was trying to protect me and my 2 children, and I didn't have the skills and resources to do anything. I wasn't aware what I was in was abusive. Towards the end, I ended up being in the doctor's waiting room one day, and on the notice board was this sign that said, "Does your partner do this? Does your partner do that? Is he jealous?" And I'm saying yes inside to all these things. And then at the bottom it said, "You're in an abusive relationship." I was shocked. I'd never really heard the word back then. And I didn't know what to do with it. There was no step after that of what to do. It didn't say, as far as I can recall, go speak to your doctor about this, or some person. And we can't do it alone. We're social creatures. We need someone to reach out to us. Because I went straight back home and was in survival mode trying to protect my girls and me. And I totally forgot about that piece of paper. And I really only remembered it when I wrote my book 20 years later. And then it was like, why? I totally forgot what happened between reading that and going home. And so for professionals, there's 3 things that professionals need to know. To work with the unconscious, because she's unconscious. He's unconscious, I believe, to be doing what he's doing. And the circle of people in her life are unconscious. So I was unconscious and no one could reach me. He's unconscious and it's pretty hard to break through his distorted perceptions of reality. But there's this big outer circle. And there, when that community can become more conscious and build that emotional muscle, every woman, I believe, that's in that court, in that inner circle, has access to at least one person, that could make a difference in her life, to get her out so that there can be pathways out. But it's uncomfortable. It means we've got to look at things perhaps in our own family or our own family story. And maybe it's too close to home. Because if 1 in 3 women are experiencing some form of abuse, then it's pretty close to all of us. I was interviewed on the radio yesterday and I was in the room with 3 other people while I was being interviewed. 2 radio announcers, one doing the tech work and one doing the interviewing, and there was another guest speaking as well. So it was us 4 women. All 4 of us had experienced domestic violence, and we spoke in the break while the song was on. Isn't that interesting? It happens so much. It's so prevalent in our community, and I think as a society we prefer to pretend that's not really what's going on. So I want to spend some time talking about that dynamic so that we can all become more conscious about our choices to navigate, to make a difference in our own communities. Because it's uncomfortable to talk about. Because I think it should be important that we all know from a young age what abuse is. Because if we can understand the specific naming of it, just like we teach our children other things that are good and bad, we need to be able to talk about it and not be scared to talk about it. Because if we are uncomfortable as adults to say there are some people that do bad things to other people, if we can't have that conversation with our children, how are they going to come to us? Because both my children were abused in horrific ways. And when I left and spent 7 years going through court, they didn't want to speak to anyone but me about what was going on. No court officials. Because what were they seeing? They were seeing he was still the boss. He could do whatever he wanted. If he didn't return them on a contact visit, there was no punishment or consequence to him. All they saw continuing in their world was that he was the boss. There was no outer circle that drew the boundaries in. So they didn't trust to be able to speak up. There's such pressure put on women and even children to be able to carry the responsibility about how to get through this, instead of that outer circle being able to respond and provide healthy consequences. So it's uncomfortable, I believe, as a society, because it's in a lot of our backstories. It may not be physical or sexual. I know when I go in my travels and I might be going to a conference or a talk and I'm in a taxi, and I can remember one taxi driver saying, when I talk about domestic violence, they always talk about, oh, I don't hit my wife. But it's much more than physically hitting. There's 14 types of abuse. And physical abuse is not just the physical impact directly. It's also when he smashes something against the wall, because you don't know if the next time it's going to be at you. They're displays of force. So there's such misunderstanding still about everything that is not physical or sexual abuse. And I want that we can understand as a society how damaging psychological abuse is, how damaging emotional and verbal abuse is, and how quickly something can escalate without any warning, because abuse is unpredictable, it's irrational, there's no logic to why it's happening or how it's going to unfold. And so I think there's this coping mechanism that happens in women where we think we can take care of ourselves in the situation, but we can't, because it's unpredictable. How can you take care of yourself in the unpredictable? So we have this fear of change. So this first circle that interlocks with the second circle, that's the old way, the way that we've known how to do things. The second circle is the new way, what we've incorporated, that we've learnt. But we can't just jump from the old way to the new way. When we're in the old way, there's no question, that's just the way it is. We need that interlock, and that overlapping part is the confusion, the uncertainty. And there's two ways that we can be with that. You know, a lot of people don't like uncertainty and confusion. It's not a comfortable place to be. But if we can be with that confusion with curiosity and witness and noticing, then we can gather the things that we need that are from the old, but also be open to the new. We can move out of the fixed way of the old that doesn't question things, that just does things the way it is. And then we can be open to something from the new and take some things in and experiment and find out and develop. But if we can't be with discomfort, we can tend to stay in our habit. So as a society, we need to build emotional muscle to be with the uncomfortable. Yeah. So that's one of the things that gets in the way of people speaking, that fear of change, the uncertainty. And one of the things that I've developed called the feminine principle, it's the hemisphere. So it's hemispherectomy. Yeah? It's almost like our left brain is the masculine principles. rational, mathematical, speaking, logic, the detail of things, breaking things down, compartmentalizing things, black and white, this or that, yeah? And our society, the Western culture, really values all those attributes, and they are valuable. But would we for 1 minute think we could go out into the world and cut out half our brain, cut out a hemisphere? We wouldn't, it's unthinkable, yeah? But that's what I believe we're doing. And when we talk about gender inequality, I actually think it's the feminine principle inequality, because we do have domestic violence perpetrated on men by women, and we do have it in same-sex relationships. So I think it's more than gender inequality. It's, we've cut out the feminine principle. And the feminine principle doesn't want to be exclusive. The feminine principle is inclusive, yeah. It's this and that. It's being with the body, it's being with the instinct, it's being with the feelings, it's being with the unconscious. It's able to go to wherever it needs to go instead of that linear left brain way. And when we can be with that, the right brain can talk to the left brain, and the left brain can talk to the right brain. The mind can talk to the body can talk to the mind. The conscious can be with the unconscious, and the unconscious can be with the conscious. We can be with the whole, this and that. And that, I think, is what's missing in our organisations, in our laws, in our communities, that valuing of this incredible wisdom. Because the left brain interprets and manages and speaks, but the right brain perceives things that the left brain cannot. And so if we shut down our right brain and those deep truths of the feminine, the left brain is going to make an interpretation that's actually inaccurate. It has gaps. It can't tell the big picture. It's about detail and compartmentalising and this and that. This or that. The right brain is about the big picture and this and that. So we need to be with both. But there's this triangle of discomfort. And for me, because when I met the wolf and I didn't like him, and it surprised me how many women have come up to me and said they had that same experience, because I felt like when I started sharing my story that, oh, that's not really what other women experience, but I wasn't alone. But whether you were attracted or not, there was also what was unattractive, the abuse. So we've got at one point of the triangle the attraction or the pleasing face, as in my experience. And then we've got in the other point of the triangle the abuse, the intrusion. And then at the bottom of the triangle we've got discomfort, uncomfortable. What do we do with the attraction or we've got to be nice? This abuse and the discomfort. For me, that triangle of it's not all consistent throws us out, because we haven't been given support on how to be with a conflict. There's good and bad. How do we sort that out? It's very difficult to sort that out if we don't have access to the right and the left brain to be able to think about our feelings and feel about our thinking. What do we do when there's some things that we like and some things that we don't like? See, when I met the wolf, I did that best face thing, the pleasing face. And I thought, well, he's got really nice blue eyes. He's really confident. That's a good quality, isn't it? He knows how to talk to people. And he really he loves children. He wants to have a family and children. And he wants to spend lots of time with them. I like that. So that was all the best things on one point of the triangle. But then there are all these other things. Physical behaviours, attitudes, and my deep instinctual self that said, I don't like him. But I switched off from all of that because I wasn't encouraged to be with it. And I stayed with the best face and the nice things. And I think as a society we have real trouble being with something that's conflictual. How do we sort out when something is conflictual? How do we drop into that discomfort and explore it? Because what I find happens is we want to get away from the discomfort, so we minimise the bad and we accentuate the good. And we avoid, get busy, distract, rather than stay with the uncomfortable. But if we can build that emotional muscle to be with the uncomfortable, so that if there is an attraction or something good, and there is that abuse or something toxic, instead of that discomfort and overwhelm down the bottom, we can have that curiosity and that witness and the ability to think about this and feel about this and this. But we also need that support to be able to have our fierceness, yeah? So that it can be okay to be not pleasing to the other. I was walking recently in the apartment block where one of my daughters lives, and one of her neighbours is not a pleasant man. He's actually quite scary. So when I pass him in the corridor or the lift, I don't acknowledge him at all. I don't believe I need to do the Little Red Riding Hood, hello, just because somebody else says it to me, when I've personally had experiences of him being threatening. He got angry at me recently because I didn't acknowledge his hello. Started swearing at me, saying I'm a rude you know what. And I remember another time when I was with my granddaughter and I didn't acknowledge him. And I said to my little 4-year-old granddaughter, you know, sometimes people say things not because they're being nice, even if it can sound nice, but because they want to use that to get to you. And so right from then I wanted to teach her that she can go out into the world and she doesn't have to be Little Red Riding Hood. Another time I was with her and we came across a little boy around her age and he wanted to play with her. She didn't want to, she hid behind my legs. You know what the mother said to her son? When my granddaughter said no, this mother said to her son, that means yes. I know. She's not teaching her son to have emotional muscle, yeah? That we all get rejected in life for jobs, dating, all the time. We need to have emotional muscle, yeah? And it hits on something really uncomfortable, yeah? Because that rejection hits on something really primal in us, yeah? We need, in our survival pathways within our psyche, to belong and not be rejected for survival. But we've evolved so much that actually we can survive even if our tribe rejects us, yeah? But it's still in our system that it is so important not to be rejected. And I really think we need to have more conversations with each other about when we feel rejected, or I want to say something and I'm concerned you're going to feel rejected or offended. But for us to have closeness, I want to be able to say my whole self when it's relevant to each other for the relationship. It really horrified me when that mother said that. So how do we be with our own discomfort and take care of those feelings of offending someone else or rejecting someone else? Because if we're not rejecting someone else, who are we rejecting? Yeah, ourselves. And I don't want to teach that to my grandchildren. I don't want that for the circles of people they mingle with. Yeah. So there's a lot more that I could say about discomfort. There's a lot that we go into about the coping mechanisms, because when we get stressed, the emotional brain can get activated in the right brain. It can shut down, so we're not talking between both hemispheres. There's so much how we need to understand what happens in our own brain and our own body when we get stressed, when we're in overwhelm, so that we can respond differently rather than go into those involuntary patterns. And I think it's really important that we all learn it's our own body, our own feelings, and we're not just conscious beings, we have an unconsciousness. And the more we can relate to our unconsciousness, the more we can bring more into consciousness and continue growing and developing. Do you know that when we get rejected, it registers in our brain the same as if we've been physically hurt? So rejection and discomfort are really powerful. And the cues that get activated for fear and rejection are much higher when it comes from our own circle than when it comes from someone outside our social group. It's inherent, this need to belong and this aversion to being uncomfortable because of, in our DNA, the risks on our survival. So we need to understand more about how to be with discomfort so that we can take the awareness that we have into action, because awareness is useless if we can't be with the discomfort and move into action. Because we can all do so much in the circle of who we engage with every day in our life. I remember I was at an event recently, and a woman said to me, "Oh, the work you do is so important. What I do is not important at all." And she worked at running events. And I said, "Don't for a minute think that what you do isn't important, because everyone is in contact with people, and you might not realise how you are with someone is going to make a difference." I remember when I was in the abusive relationship and I was very isolated and I wasn't allowed to go out anywhere, and the only place I really went out was to school or shopping, or when we'd go on family events together. And every week, my pleasure for the week was going shopping to get the vegetables and the groceries, because I'd go back to the suburb I used to live and go visit the guy in the veggie shop, the guy at the health food shop. They were friendly and warm and caring and real. And even though they didn't know what was going on for me, they were, without me knowing back then or them knowing, they were like a thread to the outer circle that gave me a possibility of something happening. And they started the movement for me before I could even realise what I was in. Because the health food shop knew how much I was into health. And he said one day, "I know this woman and she does these cooking classes. Why don't you go?" And because I had no life of my own, I never would have thought of doing something like that. But I could go back and ask the wolf, "Can I go to this?" Because I had enough permission in myself, because this will be good for the family. I didn't have something that I could do for myself. But it got me out of the house again. It got me being valued. I had normal conversations with someone, and it made a difference to me. It gave me a bit more strength. So it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. That health food shop guy was part of an important chain of events. And those veggie men that were delightful to my kids and me kept the hope going, even though it wasn't conscious at that point. And it was through those kinds of experiences that gradually, it wasn't one moment that helped me realise what was going on. There are a series of events, and each one loosened things a little bit more, a little bit more. But those people that saw me and were present to me made a big difference. So, being with the uncomfortable. As I said, there's a lot more we could explore with that, but that's better left for a day in really workshopping it rather than talking about it, because there's really fascinating layers of unpacking about being with the uncomfortable. And so now I want to take the questions that you've put in. If you've got any more questions, we can do some questions. Thank you. What makes him do what he does? Okay. I get asked that question a bit. And you know how I said earlier that abuse is not rational? I like to say I can't really answer that because it's not rational. There's no logical reason. Because even if he's had a traumatic background, not everybody that's had a traumatic background goes and repeats it. We could do that left brain thing of analysing and going down into diluting into layer and layer and smaller to find an answer, because as a society we don't like the uncomfortable, we don't like uncertainty, we want to find a reason. Yeah. I could, from my training as a trauma psychotherapist, give you some really good hypotheses about why, based on trauma, based on generational patterns in the family, based on societal, patriarchal influences. Yeah. But the bottom line is not everybody that lives in this culture that has all of those things goes and does that. So I think we can get caught in the why does he do it when it doesn't necessarily serve. And that's that left brain rational thinking, that desire for that certainty, rather than some people do those things. And it's not an impulse. It's not that he's out of control, and it's not that he needs anger management. If you ask any woman that's been exposed to domestic violence, when he was damaging things, did he damage his own things? You know, yeah. Yeah. He's not out of control. It's very precise. He doesn't do it to specific people. He does it behind closed doors. He does it when he chooses to. Of course, there's going to be a small percentage of people that are so psychopathic that they don't care at all. But we hear the stories in the media again and again, but he's so charming, yeah. So it's calculated, it's manipulative, it's strategic, and it's not anger problems. He's using anger as one of his tactics. But he doesn't use that anger with certain other people. He switches it on and off. Yeah. There's this delusional thinking, really distorted delusional thinking. And it's hard to change. He's got to want to. Is there a way to teach kids rejection in a loving way? Absolutely. What a great question. Thank you, whoever asked that. Yeah, absolutely. See, I believe from my own healing and from working with many, many women and men, and helping my 2 daughters with their own pain in their journey, that we can get through pretty much anything when we have a loving, accepting witness to what's going on, yeah, that doesn't judge or shame us or humiliate us or reject us. So children, if we can be with our children and when they're being rejected, and be able to stay with our own discomfort, because very often we don't want to be with our own discomfort, so we try and take our children away from the discomfort. But if we can do our own journeying and reflection about our own discomfort, we can build our emotional muscle and tune into such degrees that we might not think is possible, that might appear like a sixth sense, but is what we're all capable of when we can build that emotional muscle and be with what's going on. So there's many ways, and actually in 2017 I'm going to be putting out a book about working with children based on my work as a trauma therapist and also from my journey with my 2 girls. Because my 2 girls, it was almost as if one took the unconscious decision to be like her father, and I kind of made that interpretation that she didn't want to be like me, and I can understand that. It's better to be in control than be with the helplessness. And so she was quite oppositional her whole childhood, which was really, really challenging. And my other daughter went the total other spectrum of very, very quiet and introverted and holding everything in. So I had to journey with both and try and help one bring things out and one bring things out but in a contained way. And so I want to share those processes about how it was, because I hear of a lot of women struggling with how to be with their children with what they're going through. So absolutely we can be with rejection in an empathic way, in a feeling way, in a guiding way to allow them to be able to have expression, yeah? So often we want to jump into fixing something and we don't give our children or ourselves the space to, what does this feeling feel like and what does it need to do right now, and let the feeling have, before we get to the next bit of the behaviour. So there's a lot that we can do. Why do women stay? Another one that gets asked a lot, and actually one of the reasons I wrote my book, because when I first ran domestic violence groups, the women asked me to write a book so people would understand. And so there's a lot in my book about why women stay. But it also talks about why in relation to the outer circle, about family influences, religious influences, cultural, historical influences, the unconscious influences, the stress response influences. The stress response overrides everything. Everything. It's not possible to override the stress responses. And so when your brain's shutting down and it's mobilising into its coping mechanisms, you cannot think, you cannot process. And I remember it's putting out spot fires, just trying to make sure, because you think you can do something so that he won't explode. And that's all I was busy trying to do, and trying to make sure my children were as safe as I could keep them. And it was only when one time he went into hospital, they had a few days after he'd been in hospital, or a week or 2, I don't remember exactly how long, but it was like this fog lifted. I'd come out of the stress response and I could think clearly. And I'm taking the dinner to my girls at dinner time, and I felt this joy. I'm putting the food down on the table and I'm looking at their faces, and it was just so beautiful. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is what life is meant to be like. This is what is normal. And that was one of those moments. I thought, I'm taking my life back. So those stress responses are involuntary. And some of you will know that, which I think every woman needs to know, that we have a unique stress response as well as what men have, if that fight, flight, freeze response. That was only tested on men. Yeah. What about us women? Do we have the same or something different? And Dr. Shelley E. Taylor spent 25 years researching to find out what happens for women. And we have an involuntary stress response based on our hormones, based on our estrogen and oxytocin levels. And she calls it the tending instinct. Tend, mend and befriend. It's all about affiliation, keeping together. Yeah. Because the male's fight response and flight response is to fight the tiger, get away, and the woman's is, we've got to keep it all together, because that's how we're going to survive, yeah, in our survival, historical story of survival. We've needed to be the tribe. And so women don't want to break up that unit, yeah, and can get caught in tending, looking after him. It overrides everything. But I really think the bottom line, there's many, many reasons in my book, but the bottom line I think is because the outer circle does not acknowledge women to be able to have their fierceness and not have to be attractive all of the time, and not understanding about emotional and psychological abuse. I think they are the reasons why women stay. Because just like me, I left with no money, with no housing help, barely with nothing. And it's like, I was scared he was going to kill me. He had guns. My children were scared they were going to get killed. He was in a perfect job to hide a body, as he used to tell me. It doesn't matter all that list of those fears about why you stay. I believe if we have that outer circle that recognises abuse and allows women to be more than and be their whole self, then I think women won't have such an issue and will be able to move out far more easily when they know that there is that room for them out in that outer circle. So we've got again, why does she stay? It's a popular question. And I think it's because as a society, we are encouraged to be in our thinking function and the rational, and that if it's not rational, it's not the right answer. But that's not true. Yeah. Okay, what do I do or say to someone I'm worried about who I believe is in such a situation? That's a really important question. It depends what kind of friendship you have as to how I would coach you to how to stay connected to them and what to say and what to do. But as I said before, encouraging them to stay connected is really important and out in the world. But I do coach women to help support other women who they're friends with to know what to say and what not to say, because we can think we're saying the right thing, but we don't realise how we're unconscious to what the tone of our voice or the look in our eyes that can send another message to that woman who can't tolerate those other messages. And so taking care of your own fears and getting support for your own fears is really important. But to how to talk to her, that's also another book that's coming out next year of how to talk to her. Yeah, so that it's not about having the conversation of you deserve better. Yeah, she's not in that mind frame. It's not about talking about what he is doing that's not okay, because she's clearly not conscious to the fullness about what he's doing that's not okay. It will just activate her defence system because she can't be with her own discomfort. So we need to know how to navigate back and forwards to be able to get to talk about the uncomfortable. And that means if over here is where the uncomfortable is and I think this is an abusive relationship and you should get out, and over here is where you are seeing her and where she is, we need to be with where she is and just see her, because when she's inside that abusive relationship, she is not being seen. Because abuse is your reality doesn't exist, your feelings don't exist, your needs don't exist. And so if we're so busy trying to communicate our perception of reality, even though we mean well, we're doing the same thing. We're saying, listen to my reality. Yeah, and we don't want to repeat that. We need to be with her reality. And even when she can't be with the fullness of it, how can you be with her and be real in the moment and see her and just take the time just to look in her eyes and see her and let her know that you see her and you feel love for her. Let her be seen instead of being so busy to get her to come to a conclusion. Yeah. But I do coach women how to have those specific conversations. I can only talk generally today. So we'll just do one more question. What legislation do you think is needed now to help someone get out of a dangerous situation? It's really complicated. It's an important question. It's complicated because we're still inside a culture that has all systems from that patriarchal and very left brain, rational, conscious self that doesn't take other kinds of proof. My children's behaviour was not considered proof. Yeah? And it needed another witness for there to be proof. So what I believe is really important is the legislation needs to include recognising the trauma response, the involuntary responses, and educating about that and being able to value the unconscious and normalising the... Women are actually telling their lawyers, I want my children to go see him, because they don't want to be seen as the woman that's being revengeful and punishing. So their healthy instinct to protect their children is not valued and allowed to be able to be shown. And we need legislation that can value the right to protect from danger and how to recognise the trauma signals in children and in adults. And that takes a lot of skill to recognise trauma. There's not enough trained professionals in the legal system, but also in the, unfortunately, even in therapists. There's still not a lot of training. It's not standard about trauma and how it actually changes the brain. You know, I've spoken to women in the our women's group when I've met them the first time, and I do a little interview to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. And I'm hearing some women going to see a trauma therapist and they're actually being told to repeat again and again their trauma, and they're getting re-traumatised. And they're having to build more coping mechanisms to manage the flooding of the unbearable, and they're not being given the way their brain and body need. And so if we think about legislation, how do we get the material from the women in the least possible way so they're not getting re-traumatised? So I think there needs to be a lot of consultation to do with trauma therapists to help inform how we get the information, how we take care of the people that are impacted by trauma. Yeah. So is there any last question before we finish? Yeah.
do the wrong thing. They don't, they just slap on the wrist, so to speak, or they go back to court and then it has to go through the process without any real consequence.
Yes. I think it should be. We really need to, on a preventative level, be working early on parenting and in school about how to be with rejection and how to be with uncomfortable feelings in processing ways. But when we can't just work on prevention because we've got this epidemic. So we need to be able to have the consequences, absolutely. Because, there's not enough consequences. I'm still hearing an extraordinary amount of absolutely horrific horror stories, like a man who had to leave the home because of domestic violence, and while she was out at work, he lived in the roof and would come down and eat during the day and then go back up in the roof. Or another woman had a drone behind her, so while she's punching in the code to get into the refuge, the drone's trying to pick up the code. Another woman whose child, on a child's backpack, there's so much technological abuse now. He was recording and using a GPS to locate where she was and what she was doing and letting her know. There's just so much, and there's not enough consequences, and there needs to be really good programs, I think, but long-term programs, not someone that's so delusional in their reality about what's going on and how she should be needs long-term therapy and long-term behavioural groups that work with shame and the trauma response. So that's what I think of when I think of consequences, because to me it's not about punishment, because that's not going to solve anything. Yeah, but we need long-term programs to help work with the brain, and we need those social messages that let the men know. That's why I encourage everyone to be able to speak up and be with the uncomfortable, because if everybody in their circle, when anyone says something that's denying of another person's feelings or reality, whether they're in the room or not, if everybody speaks up, then we're all going to get the message as a society that it's not okay. And when there's a greater general consensus, then I believe we're going to have far less abuse. That circle's going to be a lot smaller. There'll be less room to move. Was it one last question? Did you have a question?
Along the same lines as well, you're saying that professionals need to be educated more. I'm concerned that teachers also need to be educated more, that a lot of behaviours that are being diagnosed as on the spectrum or whatever, some of this is trauma response, and teachers wouldn't have a clue how to recognise it.
Absolutely. I think there's misdiagnosis, and it's like we like a diagnosis because it gives certainty and contains it, and it's black and white, and there's lots of trauma. I see that in my therapy room, that there's diagnoses that come in, but it's actually trauma responses. And absolutely, there needs to be, I know there's awareness raising about healthy relationships and abuse in schools. I have serious concerns about the waste of money that's going into some of those programs that are just talk. And if you know about neural pathways don't change from insight. They change through being affected, and we need to be able to be affected, and we need to engage with those branches in our brain where the beliefs are that we've absorbed from our family or our culture or specific incidents in our lives, and that doesn't come from talking nice about it. So we need to be able to be affected and change, and I think we need a lot more happening in schools to educate the teachers and have a ripple effect through the schools. So,
and like you said, your children were ignored. The behaviour they displayed, if somebody was educated, they would have been able to say, "Oh, bingo."
Yeah. So listening to the little. Did you want to say something?
Because there's so many variations on the abusive character, how does a person recognise the wolf in different costumes?
Yes, and that's an important question. What I tend to say is, even though there's 14 types of abuse, we don't have to try and remember all the 14 types if we know clearly what abuse really is. Because abuse is when one person uses force and control to deny another person's reality, feelings or needs. So whenever you see, it's a pattern of that, yeah? Because one of the things I like to clarify is, we all have a best and a worst face, yeah? We all deny someone else's feelings or needs at times. We all raise our voice at times, yeah? We need to know the difference between conflict and abuse, yeah? Because we all do that in our relationships at times. But abuse is when there's a systematic pattern of continual denial, control over another person, yeah? And so, yeah, does that help answer? Yeah. So, well, that first thing that I said about the woodcutter, listen to the little, it's like, even if you don't see it as a systematic pattern with someone, it's like, take it seriously when you see there's this control or denial. Yeah, that's important. You're important. Your existence, your reality is important. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming. We will close with a bit of a door prize thing for attending today, and a little bit of a chat. We've still got some time before the evening is over, and you're welcome to look at my book. And it talks about how I got.
Just put the book back and just do that little read again.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and 1 second, and go.
So I'll just talk about my book, The Wolf in a Suit. The first part of my book is my story, how I got caught, what daily life was like, what helped me to wake up, and I unpack the whole series of different experiences that helped lead to that I didn't realise at the time, but reflecting back. Then I talk about what daily life was like, protecting myself and my girls through the court, the police, healing, socialising. And I also reflect on my family and what shaped me and contributed to me getting caught. And then part 2, I talk as a psychotherapist. And so then in each chapter I talk about the 7 key areas that I think contribute to why women stay and why we have a society that is asleep and can be aware, but awareness is useless without action. So I incorporate throughout the whole book 11 fairy tales. 2 versions of Little Red Riding Hood go through my story, and then there's 9 fairy tales in the rest of the book. And so the original story's there, and then I unpack my interpretation in the context of the different stories that I think are really relevant. And plus I jam in a whole lot of important information inside. So that's The Wolf in a Suit. And I also have Crazy Making Verbal Emotional Abuse Explained, which will be one of the door prizes tonight. And that is me talking about the definition of abuse, what is the difference between conflict and abuse, as we touched on, and also I unpack 30 tactics of what verbal and emotional abuse look like, and how the perpetrator will tend to switch it round as if you're doing that. And when we're stressed and we're not being optimal because we're in an overwhelming, scary situation, we're not going to respond in our optimal way. And how there is a difference between a stressed response and an abusive response. So for most of those tactics, I explain how it can look the same and why it's not. So I unpack those 30 differences. But all for coming tonight, you all get my free ebook, The Ultimate Formula for Moving Forward, which has an extensive list of all of, thank you, here it is, an extensive list of all of what's required for healing, and the editor, when he looked over this, said that this is useful for anyone with any trauma or any stress. So that is my guide that looks at social levels, identity levels, safety, self-soothing, processing, all the things that we need for moving on. So that's that ebook. And we'll do the, here's the, so that's a bit from the ebook, the verbal abuse one.
Okay, go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Action.
Okay, so when we go through change, this is our old way, and when we're in our old way, we don't question things. Things are just the way they are. How do we get to a new way that's evolved? We can't just jump from here to here. There needs to be an overlap to get there. And before we get in this new way that's got more information, we're in this intersection where it's uncomfortable and there's confusion and uncertainty, and we need to have that uncertainty for us to be able to open up to more information. Otherwise, we just stay with just what we know. So we need to be comfortable and build that emotional muscle to be with that uncomfortable place that has the gift of bringing in new information. And if we can be curious here and witness and notice and have the emotional muscle to bear the discomfort, we can gain some really important knowledge.
Okay, and now the next guy.
Okay, I've got to try and remember what I drew. Okay, so what we have here is, when we're talking generally, this is the woman who's trapped, the Little Red Riding Hood, and this is the wolf. Yeah, she's trapped inside his reality. Yeah, everything that's going on for her is based on his reality because her reality is being denied. And it's very hard to reach her because she's trapped inside here, and there's not enough support and safety to be able to recognise the fullness of what's going on. But they are both inside the community. Yeah. And when community can recognise about the pressures put on women to be Little Red Riding Hood and not own their fierceness, and when the society can recognise about abuses beyond physical and sexual, but that emotional and verbal and psychological abuse, then there can be a pathway out for her, because she'll get that her reality is known, and there'll be greater pathways to get out when she can know that her reality is real and true and important. So it's very hard to reach her, and he's in such unconsciousness. We need here to be active consciousness to be able to reach those that are vulnerable in that inner circle.
Okay, next.
So we've been talking about discomfort, and here's discomfort. Yeah, it's unbearable. And over on here, we might have the Little Red Riding Hood, I've got to be pleasing, I've got to respond nicely. And over here, we've got the abuse. Yeah, and it's very hard. Over here is also, there might be some attraction. And it's very hard to be with attraction and abuse, to be with good and bad when we're Little Red Riding Hood. And so when we've got this good and bad and this discomfort, we can tend to block out this and just focus on here, because we don't have the encouragement and permission and support to be able to think about our feelings and feel about our thinking and know, what does this mean? I've got this attraction, but there's this going on. What do I do about this? And so very often what can happen when there's this attraction is we'll minimise this and focus on this instead of being able to be with both. And we need both sides of the brain to be able to be with both. And when we can be with the attraction, then we don't get caught in the ideals and the Little Red Riding Hood, I'll be nice and I'll be pleasing. Then we can go, well, I like this, but I don't like that. And then we can navigate this discomfort rather than getting caught in the conflict. About 80 pages long. No, that's okay. No, I have to email it. No, that was just the cover. That was just the cover.